Morning, everyone. Howdy. I hope you're all really well. It's good to be here. Thanks heaps. It's good music, right? I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a completely foreign world or environment. Maybe you've been to a place where it's kind of completely culturally different to everything you've experienced before. Maybe it's stepping into like a new job or a new season or a new place or a new church where everyone's different, all the expectations are different, and you sort of feel like an outsider looking in. It's one of the strangest things in life, I think, that you can be sat right next to somebody but have an entire world of difference in between you. I don't know if you ever thought about that. Like the person next to you, some of you might be sat next to friends or family, some of you might be sat next to someone you don't know, incredibly uncomfortable, especially in a church environment. I remember one morning, I used to go, before I was married and had kids, I used to go to the beach every morning and observe the beauty. And there's this space, it was beautiful, and I used to walk down all these steps to get to a beautiful beach. And I'm from England, and so the beach is still a beautiful place, because we don't really have them in England. And certainly, you can't see them, they're just all sand and oil. But this was a beautiful spot, and you get halfway down this sort of staircase, and there's a bench, and I used to sit on that bench. I remember one morning, I went and I walked downstairs, sat on the bench, was sat there, I had a coffee, life was perfect. And then I could hear steps behind me, and I thought, man, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, what is someone else doing awake in Joondalup? But then they walked downstairs, and then they sat on the bench, right? The audacity. They sat right next to me. Now, I mean, some of you will be able to relate to this, but it's like, going to the bathroom, and there's a wall of urinals, and there's all empty, and then they come and stand right next to you. I was outraged, sat on this bench, looking at God's creation, that someone would have the audacity to sit right next to me. I mean, it's literally like miles of empty sand. I'm convinced there's just these extroverts that roam around looking for uncomfortable people that just need to. So I was sat there, and so I did what any reasonable Christian guy would do. I got up and left, and I went home. And I just remember reflecting. That was a really interesting moment for me, self-reflecting, going, I wonder why I felt so uncomfortable. Have you ever felt uncomfortable sitting next to someone thinking, there is so much opportunity in this moment, but there's an entire world or obstacle in between us that we have to overcome before we can get deep, right? And oftentimes, it's one of the most difficult things in life to open yourself up to another person, to be vulnerable enough to learn from other people. Oftentimes what happens in moments of discomfort, moments of sort of strangeness, is we retreat and sort of entrench into our tribe, our way of thinking, our culture, our life. We go back into what we know, and that kind of acts as a barrier and a distinction between other people. Some of you know, the first 2 weeks of this year, I got to spend some time in the US. Some of you have been there. Have anyone been to America? Yeah, some of you. I've never been before, so I was really looking forward to it. It's really strange. Now, I grew up in England, so we got to travel all around Europe. So I've been in lots of places with foreign languages, foreign bread, different food. Spent some time in Asia where everything, looks, smells, and sounds different. But I have never felt so out of place in my life than in America. And it was strange because I didn't expect it. I just thought, they speak English, we'll be fine. But I spent 2 weeks there, and my brain moves I'm always analyzing myself and other people. So it was like an overload of things. I spent 2 weeks with people that were incredibly different from me in almost every respect. I was there for work, for a conference. I remember having lunch with a guy who self-professed as a gun-carrying fundamentalist evangelical Texan. I was going, wow, we're different. I sat there as someone was trying to explain to me that mental health was obviously just demonic possession and that there was a massive Christian conspiracy to cover it up. I was walking through a museum as one of my friends argued with the museum curator about the dating of the fossils because the earth has only been around for 6,000 years, and that's what it says in Scripture. I went to a number of talks where they said that globalization and capitalism and consumption were good news for the poor. So what was everybody complaining about? But probably the starkest moment was when I was talking with a friend who I've loved and cherished for years and still do, talking about Jesus and faith while holding an AR-15 assault rifle with 100 mag, thinking there is something strange about this moment. And yet, in the middle of that experience, there were some really powerful things that God started doing inside of me, and that's what I want to share about this morning a little bit, if you'll allow me. Because one of the most formative experiences I had was going out for lunch with a guy, the gun-carrying Texan guy. And we were culturally, politically, religiously on probably different ends of the spectrum as far as I like to identify myself and as far as he likes to identify himself. But we spent probably about an hour looking at photos of his kids, my kids. He loves camping. I love camping. He was showing me all the beautiful spots where he's from in Texas. I was showing him Perth and all of our beautiful beaches. He offered for me to go and stay with him in his home, and I offered the same. And I was kind of overwhelmed in that moment, realizing all of the things in my mind that differentiated me from him, that world of difference between me and him, all those walls that I build, all those differences that I have constructed in my head, became kind of silly in a moment. Because I realized that there was so much more binding us together than there was separating us. But isn't it strange how those things that hold us apart oftentimes seem insurmountable? But the moment you begin to step in and press into something new, all of those things become silly. There's a passage of scripture that I have carried with me for a long time now. I remember reading it years and years ago, and it really struck me as kind of a pivotal moment in Paul's life. And really, it became a pivotal moment in my life when I began to read this and realized that there's a certain calling on us as Christians, as people of faith, to be in moments where we have the opportunity to differentiate ourselves. We have the opportunity to build these walls, identify these differences. We can either lean into those differences or we can lean into people. We can lean into love. We can lean into something else. And this is a moment, I think, that really defines Paul's ministry. For those of you unfamiliar with Paul, he was the one after Jesus who basically took up the message of the gospel, the transforming power of Christ. And he was responsible for sort of taking it out to the world, okay? You have sort of like the 11, 12 disciples. Their goal was essentially to evangelize the Jews in Jerusalem. Paul had the rest of the world, okay? So he had a big job. But I'm going to take you into a passage that for many of you will be probably quite familiar. But let's just for the next few minutes just unpack some of the layers in this particular scripture with the goal of looking at how we might be able to uncover ourselves in relation to other people. Is that all right? So I'm going to read from Acts 17, and we're just going to kind of work through it sort of gently, but fairly quickly. Because Paul, in Acts 17, we're going to start in verse 16, he finds himself in Athens. Now, if you know anything about Judaism and you know anything about Athens, they're completely sort of incompatible. Okay, Athens was kind of the philosophical capital of the world. It's where Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, it's where they came to fame. It was a concoction of different pagan deities, like Corinth, all kind of meshed together. And so you had all these interwoven beliefs, people practicing. It was kind of like spiritual experimentalism. You could kind of just do what you wanted to do. And they had all these different gods and different idols and all that sort of thing. It was a very weird place. And up until this point, Paul has spent a huge amount of his time speaking to Jews, okay? Now, Paul is a Jew himself. He's a Jew that's had his heart transformed by the message of Jesus. And so he knows the Jewish system. He knows the Jewish law. He knows how to speak and reason with Jews. And I imagine he'd been taught how to speak with other people as well. But up until this point, he spent most of his time around the Jewish people. Here, he lands in Athens around the Greeks. And you begin to see a complete shift in his demeanor, his speech, and the way he interacts with people. Because here, he's in a moment where there's a world in between him and everybody else. He's in that moment of cultural incompatibility. Okay, so let's read. So starting in chapter 17 of the book of Acts, in verse 16, it says, "While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols." Now, if you know anything about Paul, he has a fairly short fuse and isn't afraid to say exactly what he thinks about a whole bunch of different things. But I think it's really important to just stop and pause here, because you get, in this moment, a little bit of an insight into Paul's heart and motivation. He looks around and he sees all the idols and he's greatly distressed. He's distressed because he sees people worshiping gods that have no hands, no eyes, no ears. They can't see you, hear you, or help you. And he knows that Christianity, at its core, is about worshiping a God who is intimately involved in us and our life. I think that's important because Paul gets a bad rap from me a lot of the time and from other people. But here, he is motivated by a passionate internal transformation. If you know anything about Paul's story, it's pretty cool. He got knocked off a horse or donkey, or maybe he just fell over by God, and he heard this big booming voice and completely did a 180 flip. We've all been there, right? And that had so deeply impacted him that he then spread that to everybody else. So he's landed in Athens. He's greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked that he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. They took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what it is this new teaching that you're presenting? You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Now, when you begin to read some of this, I think there's a few interesting twists and turns in this particular part of the story. Because Paul is in a completely foreign place, completely new information being presented to him, entirely new culture and worldview. And the first thing that he does is he reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks. Now, I think this is interesting because what Paul does, he does the same thing that a lot of us do. The moment he goes into a place and is faced with extreme cultural difference, he goes straight into the place that he's familiar and he's comfortable with. Not a big problem. But if you're in Athens wanting to bring the gospel and bring change, I've got to tell you, the synagogue is probably not the place to be. The synagogue is not the place where transformation of Athens is actually going to take place. But it's familiar to him, it's comfortable, it's where he needs to go because he's a Jewish leader, he's a rabbi, he's teaching them about the faith, that's all good. But it's important, I think, in this moment to realize that whilst this is the first place he goes, it's not the place where anything important in Athens is actually going to take place. But this is oftentimes the first place where we go when we feel uncomfortable. It's the place that you're familiar with and that you're comfortable with. It's the place where everybody speaks your language, where you're going to say something and everyone's going to go, "Oh yeah, I get it and I agree with you." Isn't it better to be around people who agree with you, make you feel good? You know that it's not going to be sort of any dissent or argument. We feel much more comfortable in those places. Have you ever stepped into a church or gone to I hate parties. I'm just going to be honest. It's probably not a surprise to any of you. But I oftentimes have stepped in a room or a party or a work function, and everyone is new. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I literally have nothing to do except conversation. So I go and hang over by they usually have a buffet. That's probably the best place to say it. And then you see someone that you know, and it's like, yes! And I spend the whole evening with them, like a Klingon. And I'm like, I'm just going to talk to you. And, because in moments where we feel uncomfortable, that's the natural setting, right? It's what we retrench back into that place of that. This is me. This is what I'm familiar with. This is who I'm comfortable with. But I love what it says next. So we reasoned in the synagogue with both the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happen to be there. Now again, Athens is big on philosophy. Socrates is like a king over there. And Socrates was known for reasoning in the marketplace with everybody he came in contact with. And so a lot of commentators, when they're writing on this, they're sort of saying Paul is kind of he goes from the synagogue into Athens, and he takes on the persona that they understand and that they're familiar with. He steps in and he becomes essentially a new philosopher, bringing new ideas to their ears. He's reasoning in the marketplace with those who happen to be there day by day. And I think it's important for us to see the shift between the synagogue and the marketplace, realizing that this is actually the place where we have the opportunity to make a difference. Does that make sense? This is the place where he begins to have conversations that are meaningful and different. It always challenges me that we carry with us this truth We call it, whatever we call it, the truth, the gospel, the message, the Jesus. We carry something inside of us that is deeply transformative, and I hope has deeply moved you and shaped you. But in moments of discomfort, we lean back into ourselves as opposed to leaning into other people to try and share and heal and help. I know that's certainly true of myself. And I know it's one of the greatest struggles for a lot of us as well. But I think this shift from synagogue to marketplace is essential for us. To realize that the greatest work that we can do as Christians with the message of faith is actually not here. It's everywhere else, almost everywhere else. It's we always say, step outside the four walls of the church. I happen to like the church. I happen to love the four walls of the church. I happen to love community. I happen to love you guys. But I'm under no illusion that making a better service, a more slick message, better worship, more slides is going to make any difference in terms of internal transformation in the lives of all of those people in our city that desperately need healing and help. Do you know what I mean? I remember sitting in a sermon one day where the preacher literally said, and it was like a denominational meeting, they said, if you want to get more people saved, I don't even know what that means, get better services, because that's where it's happening. Okay? So pour money into services, pour money into church services, people will come, they'll get saved, whatever that means, and everything will be good. I thought, I just don't think that works. I don't think Paul thought that either. So he was out there reasoning, engaging, talking, putting his ideas, responding to ideas with the people that happened to be there, that happened to want to know what he was talking about. And then, so the first space for me is the synagogue, the second space is the marketplace. But then there's a really interesting third space in this text, okay? So he goes from the synagogue to the marketplace, but then there's a few words here that are really interesting. Then they took him, and they brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus where they said to him, we want to know more. Isn't this the dream? That we would be able to talk and share with our faith and people would be like, oh, tell me more. Has anyone ever had that? Hey, I was with a friend recently. Have you ever been with a friend, like a Christian friend? They're actually a really good Christian, but because of that, they make you feel really uncomfortable, make you feel really bad. So he obviously had this evangelistic technique where every time he'd meet someone new, he'd say, hey, what's one thing I can pray for you about? And usually people are like, oh, cool. And they responded, but then he did the actual awkward thing of praying in the moment. So I'm just there, like eating nachos with him, and they bring over the guacamole, and he's like, and he gets chatting, and I'm like, don't talk to her. Oh no. And then she's talking about her life, and I'm thinking, this is just getting worse. I know what's coming. She doesn't even know what's coming. She's making guacamole for us. And he's like, what's one thing I can pray for? I thought, and honestly, they all look uncomfortable. I'm going to be honest. There's no amazing moment. You just have to pray that it's not so awkward that they never look back at that moment possibly. But here it's interesting because Paul's gone from the synagogue to the marketplace and he's engaged with them in their language, in their time, and then they're going, okay, come with us because we want to know more. I think there's ways of speaking to people about faith that mean that you're never going to be invited to talk more about your faith. It's funny to me that some people don't even care. They're like, as long as I can get the word Jesus out, that's totally fine. It doesn't matter what you do or what you think, as long as I've done my job, right? I think it's probably a little bit deeper than that. I think there's probably more going there. And some of us, we're so petrified because we've seen it done badly before and we've had those cringeworthy moments that we're just never going to, what do you do on Sundays? Oh, nothing, church. Like we're never going to do anything because we're so terrified of doing it badly, right? And as I was listening to him do it badly, I was thinking, yeah, but I don't even do that. I would just let her walk on by. And maybe that's okay. But it got me thinking, like, how are we living and breathing our faith to those around us? Because here they say, Paul, you sound a bit weird, but we want to know a little bit more. So come into this. This is the important space for us. And so they say, may we know what you're teaching, these new things that you're presenting. You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we'd like to know what they mean. And then it says, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens. And this, I think, is Paul's defining moment. See, this is where Paul finds himself in a completely new city, completely new cultural environment, speaking to people he doesn't know. I mean, he's in a city named after a Greek god of sensuality, on a hill named after a Greek god of war, speaking to people. There's a guy called Dionysus who's named after the pagan god of drunkenness. So he's in a completely strange place. And you find out at the end that he's quoting poets, writing poetry in honor of the pagan god of all creation, Zeus. And I think this is the moment where he shows us how important it is to break down those spaces in between those who we think are different and other. He said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and I looked carefully at your objects of worship, I found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and this is what I want to talk to you about." This is really funny. Like I said, Paul has this kind of precarious relationship with his own temper. If he was talking to Jews about idols, the language would be a lot more volatile than this. But he's kind of going, "I see you've got a lot of idols. Good, religious, you're on track. Let's have a deeper conversation." He starts to adjust his language already. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands." You see, already his language has changed. He's saying the God who made the world and everything in it. Previously, the God who made Israel. The God who breathed life into the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. But he couldn't talk about Israel, because Israel was this kind of obscure place. He couldn't talk about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, because they didn't know who Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were. So he started by saying, the God who made the world and everything in it. So he starts his conversation with people who are completely different by letting them know that they're already part of the same tribe that he is. They're already part of the same story. I think this is an incredibly important moment for him and for us. Because oftentimes when we think about faith, when we think about ourselves, when we think about our culture, it's so easy to differentiate ourselves, right? The first thing he does is says, the God who created everything, and by the way, you're part of everything. And he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he gives everyone life and breath and everybody else. From one man he made all the nations. Previously, Adam. From Adam he created that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history, the boundaries of their land. And God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and maybe find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. See, this is such a powerful moment, because what Paul is doing is letting them know in no uncertain terms that they are already part of the story of God. That whilst there are differences, even profound differences between him and them, there is something so important that binds them together. And what it is the God that they haven't yet recognized, but maybe have been worshiping all along. And he's quoting poets, writing in honor of other gods. I mean, what would happen, seriously, some of you, if I was starting to preach out of the Dalai Lama's text? Some of you would be okay with it, because you're alternative. Some of you would be like, oh my goodness, I need to write to Phil, right? And that's okay, you can do that. But this is a strange moment, because he's speaking to them in a way that they understand. But it's not just about being culturally sensitive. What he's doing is letting them know, like no other Jew probably had done before, that you're in this already, whether you like it or not. God has breathed life into you. He's breathed life into the world. And because of that, we can overcome all of our differences, because we're essentially worshiping, we're not worshiping the same God, but we're created by the same God. And that means there's something that binds us together. And I wonder if there's a lesson in there for us. I'm not even really talking, I guess I am in a way, you're talking about Christians and those who don't have a faith. That's really important. I've got to be honest with you though, the people I find most difficult to engage with oftentimes are Christians. But not only that, people I find most incompatible with my own life and faith are other Christians sometimes, right? And I know a lot of you are the same. But there is something so critically important that binds us all together. And I sat at Starbucks having coffee with this guy who was so different. I was overwhelmed at how much we had in common and how much we could share in the life of Christ together, and how much all of these distinctions, which I kind of carry close to my heart, were just completely ridiculous. I don't have many, tangible moments with God. I probably shouldn't say that as a path. I have loads of them. This is one. But you know that moment where you just feel there's definitely something in this moment that I need to be to pay attention to. This was one of those moments. This is one of those moments where I felt that I needed to be graceful, but I needed to be graceful because I needed a lot of grace. You ever felt that? Sometimes we use grace as a weapon. Like, I need to be gracious with you, right? Because you're better than them, right? But in this moment, I realized that I need to be gracious because I need a lot of grace from him, right? And from God. If we were to talk about theology, I'd think he was wrong and he'd think I was wrong. If we talk about politics, the same. Economics, the same. But all of that became kind of futile and silly as we broke down the wall that was there between us. Does that make sense? I wonder who that is in your life. I wonder who it is that you can... I wonder how much richness kind of awaits us when we begin to do that. One of the most powerful stories I have in my Christian experience so far is I used to work in construction. You can probably tell. I'm really handy. It's terrible. It was the worst. I was going through Bible college. Someone offered me a job. I was like patching concrete walls. I say that. I don't even know what I was doing. I was just throwing mud onto a wall, going on to the next hole. All like buildings probably fell down. But I remember one day I worked for a very, very good Christian. And on the way in, he said, "We got some new guys today." He said, "You need to be careful. They're dodgy." He actually said they're dodgy. They're from Rockingham. Right? So I'm sorry. I don't hold the same view. That's exactly what he said to me. And so we got in. And we walked onto the site, and the new guys were already there. They decided to get started early, and they were in one of those scissor lifts, you know. It was elevated, and they were driving it, which apparently not supposed to do. And as we got there, literally, it was one of these comedic moments, they drove it into a wall, into a pipe, and the pipe burst, and all the water started shooting through. And then one of the guys on the top just went, "My bad," you know. And I thought, this is going to be fun. A couple of days later, I got to work, and the guy who I worked for put me with the guy that crashed the scissor lift, right? Said, "I want you to work with him. You're going to be up a boom lift all day, fixing walls. And I want you to take charge." And I was like, "You don't know. I have no idea what I'm doing." And this other guy really did. He was very handy. So we ended up a boom lift for the whole day. And it was one of the most remarkable days I've had, probably. Because we started talking. So it turns out he hated church because he'd been to church, right? And he'd had terrible experiences in the church, like really bad experiences in the church. So we started talking about faith and Jesus and other things like that. And we were up there for 9 hours patching one wall. This shows you the productivity of our, you know. And, he wanted to turn the lift onto like hair mode, which was fast, and I wanted to keep it on turtle mode because I'd been given a responsibility. But in between all of that, we had conversations about Jesus. And he's a tradie from Rockingham, and I was a budding theologian from Joondalup. And I didn't want to be there, and he didn't want to be there. But over the course of 9 hours, something incredible happened, where we actually began to break down those differences. So we then developed a friendship that has lasted for 10, 11 years. And it's the deepest friendship that I actually have at this moment. And I always look back, who's the best man at my wedding? You know, we hang out all the time. I look back at that moment and think how easy it would have been to miss 10 years worth of critical friendship that has got me through some of the hardest times of my life. You know what I mean? How easy it would have been to just go, "You're a bogan." The things that define us, right? The words that we use. And that was one of the words that was used. He probably didn't have any words for me. But it would have been so easy, and I'm so grateful that I didn't miss that moment. So I wonder how it is with you here. The end of the story, skipping down to verse 32, says, "When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, 'We want to hear you again on this subject.' And at that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, and a woman named Damaris, and a number of others." So it's not a great ending to the story. You know, you kind of expect in these moments, because we've watched a lot of movies, that everyone falls on their knees. But no, he shares his faith, and some laugh, and then some are interested. And I think that's the best we got. But what is fascinating is that he actually stepped into a moment and was brave enough to not step back into his distinctions, the things that define him, but was open enough to step into the things which define them and show that there's actually not so much difference between us. You know, having a tribe is really, really important, I think. Like having your people. Anyone got a tribe of people? I love Westcity, and I think Westcity is a great tribe. Like we've got some really cool people here, and we've got some really cool things that we do. So I think having a tribe, a family, a friendship, a circle is really important. But I think that tribalism, when you begin to define yourself and your group by your distinctives, I think tribalism has no place in Christianity whatsoever. And it's a really delicate line to walk. Having a tribe, having a people, and being tribal. You know? And I think sometimes you can become tribal without even knowing it, right? You can become a people that differentiates yourself from others. I've seen it at this church and almost every other church I've been to. I've seen it in almost every social setting because that's what we do as humans. We identify what defines us, we identify what defines others, and then we box everyone, categorize everyone, and that's how we live our life. What a sad life. What would it be like if in 2018 we committed to stepping into the world that exists between each other, breaking down tribes? And the reason I say it's important to have a tribe is because it's exactly right. It's important to have a tribe. But your tribe is not what defines you. And as the church, it's not what holds us together. What holds us together is our ability to proclaim truth and life to each other and to the world around us. And so as we build a tribe, a family of encouragement, of hope, of peace, of love, we're going to spend, we have guest Des coming next week to speak around kind of Australia Day. But then in February, we start a new series called Belonging, where we're going to be going through some of the distinctive aspects of Westcity's beliefs and theology. It's going to be really dangerous. No, it's going to be great. But we're going to do 4 weeks around the new wineskins of our church. Not as a way of entrenching us further, but of sort of speaking about the life that is here. But the whole purpose of that is not to further reinforce a tribe, but to breathe life into us so that we can breathe life into others. Yeah? And so I pray that this scripture, as I carry it in my heart and it constantly comes back and slaps me across the face, particularly when I'm sitting with others that I just have differentiated myself with, maybe we can make it our project this year to have no others in our life, to have no one that is different. And that's going to probably be a long-term project. But I think the faith that we carry compels us to do that. Is that okay? So we're going to transition now into a time of communion. And is there any better way to celebrate the differences among us than all gathering around the same table? So I'm going to pray, and then John's going to come up and invite us to the table. Lord, thank you. We always start with thanks, and a thanks that is grounded in confession. We thank you for your goodness, we thank you for your wholeness, and we thank you for your love, and we confess that we find ourselves constantly loving by creating barriers and walls and division, and we pray that you would break the walls down inside of us so that we could break the walls down that exist between us. I pray for us as a community, as a church, that we would be able to demonstrate a love and a welcome and an embrace among each other that becomes a sign of hope to everybody that steps in, but everyone that experiences us outside as well. I pray that we would never keep the hope that you have given us trapped up in a box in our own hearts and our own souls, but you give us the courage to actually step out, whatever that looks like in our life, and share with others. Thank you for the table. Thank you that it's a sign of reconciliation and welcome and hope. And as we step forward now, I pray that you'd speak into the deepest parts of our soul and do the work that you can do deep inside of us. Amen.